All right, we're back. It's Comp 2007. It's week 2, lesson 2, part 2. We just started talking about web services a little bit. I wanted to share that with you because we got Azure passes for the most part. What I want to do right now is I want to talk about our lab that was given today. I said I want you guys to do it in class. I wanted you to do it today. Who finished it? Who's not done and probably won't be done by end of class? I've got a few people. Well, here's what I'm going to give you guys a chance to do. I want you to hone it and make it beautiful by next week, right?
Okay.
All right? So you're done. I'm going to check it next week. I want you to submit it. If you want to resubmit another version of your site to make it look nice, right? You can definitely use Bootstrap Foundation, something else, to make it look nice from a CSS perspective, but it's going to be due next week by midnight, right? So next week, Friday by midnight, that's when the due date will be. Give you lots of time to do it. When we do labs, this is the way we're going to do it. I tricked you this time around, right? But I'm not going to trick you going forward. I want you to work on it in class, and it's going to be due a week out, all right? To give you an opportunity for you to do stuff, okay? I'm not that kind of stickler. You know me. I'm not going to do that. But it'll give you a chance to hone up your stuff, really learn the stuff that you need to do, and that way you can be awesome, right? The whole idea here is to be awesome. All right, let's take a look at the lab. And if I take a look at, of course, someone's got to call me during class because, you know, if I don't have people call me, this is a common occurrence. And it's usually the regular suspects, the usual suspects. So let's take a look at this text for the lab. So if I look at the lab, it says we're exploring ASP.NET server controls. Again, for this lab, it says you'll need to build a student profile page using various .NET Server controls from the Visual Studio toolbox, right? And hopefully you can drag and drop. There's an example code that I've given you. When you upload, it says to submit it, zip the following files and upload them to Blackboard, these 3 files. I don't want just these 3 files, please. I want the whole folder. That's just easier for you guys to set up. So send me the whole folder so you don't have to just download and extract these 3 files. If you've already done that, that's okay. Right? But if you want to prettify things and you want to change things for next week, right, you certainly can. I recommend you do so and send them up upstream. Which one is the part that you guys are having trouble with? I guarantee it's going to be this looping part that accesses the skill list. This is the part that everyone seems to have issues with. And what kind of technologies? Yeah, what kind of technologies are you using? Let's talk to Karan. Karan, you finished that part. What did you use for the loop, and what did you use to make it go, to loop through your page, your options, your list? What did you do?
I use a for each loop.
A for each loop, and what in your C#? What did you use in your C# to make it work?
It's for each loop in that checkboxes.
Checkboxes, but what did you use? What is it? Selected index? Was it item selected? What was it?
I put the if statement inside that. If that is selected,
If the item is selected,
then assign that item to that.
But-
Just put the comma mark.
there you go. So if it's so he's building up a string, right? You're building up a string. If the item is selected, take the text of the item and add it into the string, which continues to accumulate, and then you take that string and you add it into the control. That's the answer to that one. So if I was going to start off this project for people that weren't here from last week, right? Because some people weren't here last week. Remember that you're still creating a Visual Studio application. My recommendation, I'm just going to shut this one down really quickly as we finish off the day. I'm going to close this one down. Okay, so I'm going to deploy a local website now. I'm not going to deploy to Azure, to the cloud, not yet. I'm going to go File, New Project, right? This time, I'm going to call this Comp. Let's do this, Comp 2007, and it'll be Lesson 2, Part 2, right? I'm going to press OK. I'm going to choose Empty instead of Web Forms when I start off. I'm going to press, and instead of host in the cloud. Right now I won't host in the cloud. I'll click that off and press OK. Okay, so once I've done that, I've got this basic setup here. I need to set up some kind of HTML page, right? Well, the default one for Azure, for ASP.NET, like we talked about last time, is you want to add in a new web forms site, right? Web forms is how you start off, right? So when you go web form, you call this default, that's the standard name, or index.html. When you press OK, it creates all the details that you need on the back end. It actually adds in this page, language, and it talks about the code behind file, which is this default asp.x.cs code behind file. And if I want to see it, of course, I can just kind of expand this little box here, and it shows me the code behind file. Now there are a couple ways to drag and drop your toolbox controls, right? Like we talked about last time. You can certainly drag and drop in design view. So this is design view. I can drag and drop my controls from here. But I always find it easier and better to drag and drop in source control view. Why? Because you somehow cannot control, you can't control where that sometimes happens. It actually adds in additional paragraph tags, all kinds of weird stuff going on the design view. Was that? Thanks, buddy. And then at the end of the day, right, if we want to drag something in, like let's follow some of the stuff that it's asking us to do. Input for student name. So in other words, enter a student name is what I'm going to be asking for. What's your student name? Well, I'm probably going to need a label. So let's put that in, right? So here's my label for my student name, right? And now right now it's label 1, right? And if you notice, my text is label, right? If I go back to design view, it's going to say label, right? And pretty ugly, by the way, too. If I go over here to, if I want to kind of put in my student name, right? My input, obviously I want some kind of text box that I want my student name to come into. So I'm going to kind of drag and drop in a text box. There it is. So now if I go back to design view, I can see live, I've got this label and a text box. Pretty simple, right? What I want to do though is I want to control the stuff that comes into my label and text box, just like I showed you guys last time, and I want to change these IDs. Well, if I go here, if I actually click on these things, this actual control that I drag and drop from the toolbox, on the right hand side I have a properties menu, right, that comes up. Here's my properties. I can do it two ways. I can physically change stuff here in line, or I can go here in my properties panel and change this to say something like, you know, student or name label. It's called name label. There we go, name label. And the same thing as I see it changed automatically. And I can also do this here, right? So it's going to be the name, name text box, right? Remember, because what I'm asking for is my student name, right? So maybe this is going to be the first name text box, right? So first name text box, right? Or write the whole thing out, first name text box, right? So this is what this is. So I'm getting information. Now that I have these two controls labeled, I can access them, right? Okay, so that's one thing. Second thing is input for password character should be obscured. Okay, let's try this out. So I want to drag in my password label. So this is my password label. I'm just going to kind of go in here and drag in a label, right? And inside here, I'm going to rename this thing, right? Because I'm clicked in here. I'm going to rename this thing as it's a password label. Right? And then once my ID is in there, it changes it over here. I'm just going to minimize this thing for a second, or get rid of it. And the same thing goes with, I'm just going to drag in a couple of other controls, my other text box, which is going to be this, my password text box, right? Here's my password text box. Now it says my input is obscured, right? So that's going to be something that I want to try and do. So here's my, sorry, I'm going to click on the right area when I go properties. And let me pin this thing, right? So I'm up here, now I'm here to password text box. I'm going to change this to password text box. Okay, there we go, password text box. How did you, if you were going to make it so that it's a password, what do I change on here to make it so that it appears as a password? Anybody? Isn't that interesting? So I go to text mode, and now it's single line, right? And I can change this into password, right? There's different ones, number, multi-line, and so on. Password is the right thing to do. Once I change to password now, when I enter my password, let's try this out. I'm just testing this out just as normal. And this is 2 seconds it takes me, right? Okay, so I've got my label. I haven't changed these things, but here's my username, right? Tom, and my password, blah, blah, blah. That's what I wanted to see. Okay, cool. How do I put these labels one on top of the other? I need to use CSS, yeah? How do I use CSS? What do I use to put my label one on top of the other? Anyone? I could use a div, yeah? So if I've got a div right here, right? But I probably want to use separate divs for each of these things. So I want to kind of create a div tag, right? And what I want to do is drag and drop this stuff just so that it appears within the div tag. I can also cut and paste. Right? And for those people who don't like my formatting, you can also highlight everything. Oops. Highlight everything, right click, and say format selection, and it'll format it perfectly for you, right? That's one thing that you want to do. So here's my div tag. I got a div tag within a div tag. I want to probably name this div tag something like, you know, with a class. Hey, what kind of class do I need to use? If I go class, is it a class for CSS or is it a class that I'm going to be using for ASP.NET? It's a class for CSS, so my regular class is totally fine. If I go CSS class like this, I don't have access to it because it's not a server control. This is a HTML tag that I'm using, right? So on the HTML side, on the front end, right? So this is where I actually put in class for CSS. So my class, or ID, if you will, lowercase ID, is equal to my name div, whatever I want, right? Then I go to the next one, do the same thing, right? And I want to get some space in there. So I want to kind of grab all this stuff. Well, this time we'll cut and paste, just to show you the other way of doing it. Cut and paste, right? Here it is. And if you notice, I need to also format this. I'm lazy, right-click, format selection. Format selection puts everything nicely in line, right? And I want to give this an ID as well. So I want to say ID, right, is equal to password div, pass div, whatever. Now I'm going to create some CSS for this, but I don't have a CSS file, right? So I could do it inline. I don't recommend that, right? I recommend that we go back to Solution Explorer and we create a folder, right-click, right? I want to add in a new folder. Now it's got to be an ASP.NET folder. That's the real way to do it with ASP.NET. You can choose whichever one you want, app code, and rename it. That's the right way to do it, to CSS or content, right? That's the way to do that there. So here's my content folder. And inside there, I'm going to add, like I showed you guys last time, I'm going to add in a style sheet. And I'm going to call this main.css. There it is. Right, here's main.css. And I'm going to drag and drop this style sheet underneath my title, which is going to be lab 1 for my title. Right, here's lab 1. Right? And I'm going to drag and drop this thing right in there. So here's my main CSS. I'm drag and dropping this in here for my sheet. I'm just going to hide this for a second so you guys can see that. Here's my, so now my main CSS is in there. And what I want to do in here is I want to target, that name div. So here's name div. And I need to put a hashtag in front of it. So here's name div, right? I'm going to do something with that. And I'm probably going to do the same thing with each of them for now. So I'm going to name div, and I'm also going to put in a target for my other one, which is a pass div, I think is what I called it, right? Pass div, these two things. And I want to go display block, right? 'Cause that's really the quick way to kind of create a block, right? Let's see if that works any better, if I've done it correctly. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I don't know. There it is, label. So I've got my stuff on top of each other. Now I should probably change it so it doesn't say label, right? That's bad. Here's my text. I can do two ways. I can change it here physically, right? Let me stop debugging. Or I can go into properties, right? And I can pin the property. Here's my name label, right? I can put in something like enter name or student name. By the way, I could have separated this up with first name, last name. I didn't do that. Just for the sake of time, I'm just kind of rushing here. And the same thing goes with my other label, which is this one. I could change this into password. Right, so password, name and password. Now if I run it, and if I've done everything correctly, then I should have a name and password coming up. That's my first thing, student name and password. There's no prettiness about this thing. For me to add prettiness, a pretty site, to make it a pretty site, the best way to do it, of course, is to use Bootstrap. So if you go getbootstrap.com, we didn't talk about this, but we will as we go forward. If I want to get started, Bootstrap has its own set of code, like a default starting website that it shows you right here. And it shows you the stuff that I need. I need this meta name, viewport, content, device, is equal to device width is equal to device width, and initial scale is equal to 1. That's just for mobile devices so that it can respond. I need that little tag right there. Because I'm lazy, I'm not going to type it out. And I'm going to go back into the head of my document, and if it doesn't exist, underneath my head and above my title, I'm going to drag and drop that in there. I also need to put in a meta tag, as we did last time, that kind of shows off our character set. So character set is equal to UTF-8, because I think if I want to be HTML5 compliant, I need those two things. So that's one thing I want to change. That's one thing I've changed. And now I need my special CSS and stuff for Bootstrap, because I can't run Bootstrap simply by having this main CSS file. I have to have my Bootstrap CSS. And of course, I've already downloaded Bootstrap. You can get Bootstrap on your own. I've created a library for Bootstrap. Here it is. right? This is an older version, but here's my CSS. I need this bootstrap.min.css file, and of course, I'm going to stop debugging for a second to do this. I'm going to go back in Solution Explorer, and I'm going to go into my file like we did last time. I'm going to drag and drop this into my content. So I've got my bootstrap.min.css. I need to include this before my custom CSS because I want to do my own custom CSS after the bootstrap stuff. I'm going to drag and drop my bootstrap in here like this, right? Yay. That's not what I wanted to do. I'm going to undo that. And let's try that again. Bootstrap up here is what I said. And after I've got my bootstrap file, I already got a little bit of styling. But what I want to try and do is add in my JavaScript. And my JavaScript always goes at the bottom of my form right here. And I need to do two things. I need jQuery. So in order for me to have JavaScript, I'm going to do right-click on my solution. Right? Here it is. I'm going to go add. I'm going to do a new folder. Right? A new ASP.NET folder, by the way, which I'm just going to choose and rename. I'm going to rename this thing to scripts. It's very important to keep these names, scripts. In here, I'm going to add in a couple of new items, and I've already downloaded these two things for Bootstrap. In my JavaScript, I have my bootstrap.min.css, JS, and under there as well, I need, in order for me to run this thing from Bootstrap, I need my JavaScript for jQuery. If I don't have jQuery, and I don't think I have it here, and fonts, I probably need my fonts as well, I won't be able to run it properly. So I'm just going to go on my foundation site that I downloaded earlier and go into my vendor and drag and drop a jQuery in there as well. But you need jQuery and Bootstrap. Okay, now that I got jQuery and Bootstrap, of course I can just drag and drop it here below the form and above the body tag, right, and add in my Bootstrap underneath there. So now it'll kick off nicely, right? If I've done everything correctly, I'm going to be bootstrapping my form with a different set of fonts, right? And there you go. See, the student name and password is already changed, right? And now I can use Bootstrap to create a fully responsive site, right? And this is what I want you to explore for next time. This is your quote-unquote homework to be included with your lab for next time. I want you to explore Bootstrap. And how do I, if I'm going to go get starting with Bootstrap, how do I go in here and change my CSS? If I go to CSS for Bootstrap, and I want to add in controls, I want to add forms controls. Here's forms, buttons, images, tables. Here's my form. Here's an example form, and I want to prettify it this way. Well, if you notice, Bootstrap uses these classes for the forms. All you do is mark up your HTML with these classes, and they automatically take on the beautification that Bootstrap will give you. All right, we're going to go into that next week. Don't worry if you don't know how to do it. But Bootstrap, if you want to do it, is one of the most popular ways to create a responsive site. So really, that's what you do. You drag and drop, right? You create your form elements, and on the back end, if I want to do something, one more thing before we go. If I want to drag and drop in a button, so here's a button. I don't have a button control right now, but I want to. And I want to start programming my button. The easiest way to do that, of course, I'm going to pin this thing on, right? Inside of my div element, which is inside of my form element, I want to drag and drop a button control, a server button control, right? If I drag and drop it in there, it'll appear in my design mode. Here's my design mode now. If I double click on this button, it's going to start off my event handler on the C# side. And this is where I write my C# code to respond to the button click that allows me to take the information that I've already defined within my two labels and text boxes and spit it back out in another section below it. That's all I'm asking you to do. So a very simple lab. We already kind of did it last week, right? All I'm doing is repeating it this week in a lab. Okay? Questions? We're going to talk more server controls next week because we kind of did an Azure presentation this week, and we did a little bit more work on Azure than I wanted to. It took a little longer than I thought. Next week we're going to review server controls, and we're going to do the next piece. All right? But for now, if you want to brush up on it, watch the videos that we had last week. Watch the videos that we just did now, and you can see that you get the gist of what I want you to do. Again, your lab will be due next Friday at midnight. Okay? Next Friday at midnight. And that's it for me.